All right, hello everyone. Welcome to another session of Lens. Today we have the pleasure of hosting our guest, Chuck Anderson, an artist, designer, and photographer based in Chicago, Illinois. He began his studio NoPattern in 2004 at the age of 18, completely self-taught, forging formal education. Since then, he has worked for clients such as Nike, the Chicago Bulls, Microsoft, Target, Vans, Time, and the Wall Street Journal, among others. Additionally, he co-founded the storied early internet culture blog, The BRILLIANCE, in 2005, along with Benjamin Edgar and Virgil Abloh, and worked as the creative director at Havas in Chicago from 2015 to 2018, and as the VP of Creative at MKTG from 2018 to 2020. He's also a dad to a 3-year-old daughter named Sylvie. Chuck, thank you so much for being a part of our Lens session, and we really appreciate it. And I'm going to hand things over to you now. And for those who are watching, please ask questions in the Q&A section, and I'll do my best to integrate them in our Q&A section of this webinar.
Cool. All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for the introduction. Thanks for having me. Weird times we're in. I haven't done it. I've been asked to do a few of these, and I haven't done any yet. There's been a lot going on in my life, as I'm sure there's been in yours and everybody watching. A lot and nothing all at once. It's just been a truly crazy time. Yeah, so I guess just to back up all the way to the beginning and kind of give a quick sort of synopsis. And should I start sharing my screen sort of whenever, or?
Absolutely, whenever you're ready.
Okay. So just to kind of start way back in what feels truly like another dimension, another lifetime altogether. Yeah, I got my start in 2004. I graduated high school in 2003 and had basically decided to forego college at the time. It wasn't some sort of like cool decision of, oh, I'm entrepreneurial, I'm going to start a business. It was more out of sort of a necessary, financial and, sort of, yeah, just the situation at the time. I just sort of wanted to take a year off and see what would happen in that year, and then maybe go to school after that. Hang on, I'm gonna let my dog in. She's gonna start barking. Come on. Right, get some company back here. Hi, go lay down. I also have a 3-year-old sleeping, a matter of like feet away right now, down for her nap. So I scheduled this specifically to be during her nap, because this is pretty much like the time I have right now when I'm in the middle of the day. But yeah, so back then, we think pre-social media, really social media for me then, if anybody's familiar with Threadless, Threadless was a really sort of important part of the beginning of my career, when they were about 4 people total at the company and had just sort of gotten started. I went and worked there just packing t-shirts. I had gotten to know those guys really early on, and asked if they had any work for someone such as myself, who was living at home in the suburbs of Chicago with my parents at the time, age 18, with no real plans. And they gave me an opportunity, and I took that opportunity. I went and basically, I packed t-shirts at the Threadless for a summer and into fall. And all that time I would come home and I would spend a lot of time like cold emailing potential clients, magazines, studios, agencies. And it was really hard to find, contact information at the time for people. Again, there was no DM, there was no Instagram. It was basically like I used to go to bookstores and get a big stack of magazines, and I would go to the magazine's masthead, look for the art director's name, creative director's name, bring a notebook, jot their name down, go home with hundreds of names from every magazine you can imagine, from like a computer arts to a complex to nylon to flaunt and fashion magazines and dog magazines and sports magazines and everything. because I was really intrigued by the prospect of doing work for magazines at the time. It's just where I saw a lot of creative work happening, and I felt like it seemed like an approachable in at the time. So I just started emailing people, while I was working at Threadless, and started getting some responses. And probably the biggest revelation at the time was a response I got from an art director at ESPN magazine, which I had just guessed his email address. I had basically put together about 20 different attempts of email addresses and combinations of first name, last name, first name dot last name, first initial underscore last name dot first name at, whatever the domain may be, .com, and then just type out short and sweet introduction email and bounce back until there wasn't a bounce back. And then I knew one went through. So I just had to get real creative and try and figure it out. It's so much easier now to find someone's name and contact information. You pretty much just if you want to work for someone or introduce yourself to someone now, it's really just a matter of, looking them up and, Instagram search here, LinkedIn search there, type their name, you can find their email. It's not hard. So it was just a really scrappy beginning for me, and just lots of trial and error, until it sort of snowballed and started building up to the point where I was getting enough, responses and projects with magazines where I was able to leave Threadless. And Threadless is also important to me, and something I always share when I speak at schools or talk to students, because the opportunity for me there was not a creative one so much as a labor one, but it put me in a position to be around people who were very helpful and, gave me some really cool opportunities. A guy named Jeffrey, who worked at Threadless at the time, did a lot of flyers for a club here in Chicago called Smart Bar. And I wasn't even old enough to go to Smart Bar, but he didn't have time to do them anymore, and basically asked if I was interested for $100 a pop. So I said yes, and that became kind of like a portfolio filler / like a chance for me to just sort of get to know what it's like to work with a client and do work for, music. And music and sports work really became kind of like my bread and butter and just sort of what I did, most of in my career. So, lots of that. And yeah, so again, it just kind of snowballed, and eventually I started an online store, which at the time, again, we're going back 15, 16 years, there was no Shopify. I had to get my dad's friend who knew some web development, to basically help me build an online store and find a credit card, find a bank that would accept credit cards on the internet, which was some random bank in California I had to set up a bank account with. I mean, it was everything was processed super manually. I would get an email and then I had to go in and print out their address, and I would bring IKEA bags full of prints and books to post office, and nothing about it was automated. But again, I was just kind of learning the ropes as I went and sort of figuring it out as I go, which is kind of what I named my talk today, because that's more or less been the theme of my career, all the way back then, 16 years ago till now, and 2020, as I begin to navigate what the next chapter looks like, at the moment, given everything going on. So so I mean, just lots and lots of that, lots of being invited to speak. Eventually, again, I was getting a lot of attention on the internet from a really young age. I was 19, 20, doing work for some pretty big clients, and it wasn't particularly difficult to get the attention of design message boards, and the few sort of forums that existed on the internet for that sort of realm at the time. And so, I started kind of getting attention and getting invited to speak at design conferences and schools. Sometimes I was, speaking at places where I was the youngest person there, and it put me in a position to be, very mindful and aware of what education meant to people, in a way that I had sort of written off because it wasn't a path that I chose for myself. And so when I got invited to speak at Columbia in Chicago, which was the school I probably would have gone to and then chose not to, that was a pretty big, and I was really young. I don't think I was quite 20 yet. I'm 35 now, but I think that was around the time where I started realizing that, education does matter. And I just chose a different path. So I became very aware of how I talked about my journey and my path, being a sort of unorthodox one. Never someone to push not going to school. I'm sure my wife and I'll really encourage our daughter to go to school, and if she chooses to someday, great. But for me, it just wasn't the path. So, it's just, it became a really big part of my story and a really big thing. I became passionate about teaching and talking to students, and making sure to respond to emails when people reached out to me asking for help or advice about clients or Photoshop or whatever. And really tried to like weave that in to be a part of kind of my story and my career, so it wasn't just like Photoshop tricks and like adding color to parking lot photos and stuff all the time, which is what I did a lot of early on. So yeah, so I mean that was pretty much kind of the genesis of my career, and then lots of stuff happened, and now here I am. So I'm gonna share my. I mean, are we gonna? Am I just? Are we gonna take a break at all right now and chat at all? I want to make sure that I don't know if I'm still seeing you, so I know I haven't shared my screen yet. So I just want to make sure to.
No, right. We can just power through.
Let's go. All right. So I'm gonna share my screen here, and I'll also talk a little. There's a. I guess I should mention too. Recently, obviously 2020, like I didn't put together like a proper like presentation. I've done so many of these talks, and I've put together so many presentations of my work over the last 15 years that I didn't feel like it, just to be very honest with you, and just kind of figured I'm gonna open up a bunch of Photoshop files and do a little more behind the scenes, share some work straight off my website, and just kind of go a little more off the cuff. Because I'm not trying to add more stress or responsibility to my life at the moment, or things that that I don't feel like either doing or feels like a burden at the moment. So I figured this would be a more fun kind of behind the scenes way to share and talk a little bit about some of what I do. But yeah, and just to kind of one more thing, really back up a little bit again, was I spent 5 years in agencies. I was at Havas, Chicago, as the creative director for 2.5 years, from 2015 to like mid 2017. And then I left there to go work at a live events experiential agency called MKTG, which is part of like a bigger network of agencies called Dentsu. The huge agencies, which was really jarring to go from full freelance and then right into 5 years of working at pretty big agencies. But it was a really good learning experience, and actually something that I looked at as a chance to further learn and educate myself, kind of on the job. And there were opportunities that came my way. I wasn't really job searching. They were just things that sort of had come to me through relationships I had developed. And, they have both now come to their end, and I'm back focusing fully at the moment, right? As of now, I'm back to fully focusing on my own practice again. And I did it during those 5 years that I was working agencies, but now the focus is back to that after my time at MKTG came to an end last month. So pretty excited. I've been looking forward to kind of diving back into this world, although it's certainly a strange time to be doing things out on your own. I'm sure everybody's dealing with that in their own ways, and reading the room and trying to be cognizant of the sort of climate that we're in, and making sure to be aware of like how we're talking about ourselves and promoting ourselves when there's causes and things in the world that deserve a lot of our attention and our time that is beyond self-promotion. So certainly trying to navigate that, and be a positive presence if I have something at all to say. So that's kind of where I stand right now, and that's kind of the first like half of what I wanted to share here in this half hour, and then spend the next sort of 15 minutes, 20 minutes or so walking through a couple projects, kind of just doing a quick backstory of my work. I'm going to go ahead and share this whole screen here. Cool. We good? Everybody, can you see that?
You're good to go.
All right. So one thing, so it's top left is my site. Down here, I got Photoshop open, and I've got a whole bunch of files, Photoshop files, mostly music and sports related work. I just wanted to run through a couple of Photoshop files, which I don't really ever often do, but it's always kind of fun to share that stuff. And then on the top right here, I just have the final InDesign like output of a book that I put out late last year, which I have a copy of right here, and I'll share as well. So if you're familiar at all with my work, that kind of like a hallmark of my work is color. That's really sort of what I built my brand around and my name around. It was I wouldn't say it was by accident. Obviously, like I loved doing it, and I love working with color. and sort of very vibrant, very sort of experimental, odd color combinations. Sometimes it's very super intense and vibrant, like this, Cascade record that I did, and super like all the colors in the rainbow. And I think as I've grown and developed my sense of taste and style, I've sort of like honed that in a little bit more over the years and tried to dial it down, find ways to utilize a lot of color without sort of hitting you over the head completely. And so yeah, I think like a lot of the evolution in my work you kind of see going from very bright, this is really old, this is like 2005 piece I did for Nylon magazine. And it also depends on what the client calls for, and in this case there was a lot of apothecary and perfumes and candles and things like this, so there was a lot of color and like fragrance sort of inspiration in it. But you can really see the through line from things like that from 15 years ago to work that I do now. Like this was a mural I did for Steelcase at the Merchandise Mart in Chicago. They wanted this very sort of kind of liquid metal, big, huge, just sort of, I don't know. That was kind of the pitch, was to do this very sort of liquid, I'm trying to remember the word that they used. It was very inspired by, what's the word I'm searching for? Like purple and green. I'm just completely blanking because I'm tired and I just got done entertaining a toddler for like 6 hours. But like iridescence, that was really kind of the name of the inspiration and theme they wanted me to go with here. So again, lots of color, but a lot more rooted in black and a lot more darkness in some of this work. Same for this. These are some divider, like furniture pieces that Steelcase made that they wanted this sort of cloud, the repetition of clouds, so that's kind of what you see there. So, that's been a lot of the commercial work. You can see a lot of the color development, my personal work as well. I mean, this stuff like this that I really became known for early on. So this is 2004, and this is a piece that, I feel like I really built built a reputation around early on the internet. And, work like this and this Places You Can't Imagine piece, showed up a lot of places, and I started going out a lot at night and taking photos. Again, like, so this is 2006, and before Instagram even had been, even a concept. We were years away from that launching. Going out at night and taking photos for me was just like a stress reliever and something that I really enjoyed, doing, and just kind of getting out of the house and going to places where I found interesting, late at night, especially on like a foggy night. And then I would I'd come home, take the photo and sit with it in Photoshop for a while and just play around and manipulate it until it became something entirely new. So, I'm always walking around with the camera, whether it's just my iPhone or whether it's, my actual camera. And just, I have just tens of thousands of photos, and I'll just open them up and like just until the colors feel right. But again, you can even see in this stuff compared to some of that earlier stuff, some of the restraint that I think I started to, really work on and develop over time. Aside from photography, obviously graphic designing and just graphical, treatment of photography is big. So work like this is really a bridge sort of from photography, sort of like to going out and taking a photo and then adding things like this into it. Things like this, that's really sort of like the bridge between my love of photography and my love of working digitally and doing things completely, on the computer and in Photoshop. So, I do a lot of, multimedia and combining photography and analog with digital and putting lots of pieces together. But last year I really started to develop a completely new style and a completely new experimental type of work that was completely done in 3D, but all in Photoshop actually. So a lot of people don't know this, but Photoshop has like what I would probably consider, or most people would probably consider, quite a rudimentary, very rudimentary 3D capabilities. Nothing, particularly advanced, I think, in terms of like what it offers, although people who really know what they're doing in Photoshop with 3D might disagree with that. But, you know, for me, 3D was something I had really yet to explore and learn. I don't know Cinema 4D and I never really dived into that. It was always really rooted in graphic design and photography, but I kind of cracked of code in Photoshop and started sort of learning a bit how to, you know, create work like this, you know, really all rooted in an original, you know, depth map piece, just a flat 2D piece that I would then convert to a 3D form. And like a piece like this is zoomed out, and then this is, you know, further in, and then I would just really start exploring. And it was kind of one of those things like I truly don't know what I'm doing, but I found the work to be very gratifying and something that I really loved. And I started doing a lot of that. And I'm going to go ahead and bring this up. So I've put out books over the course of my career because, you know, my first love and really where I found a love of graphic design and creativity early in my life happened in print. You know, it was kind of like the internet was the gateway, but I worked at a bookstore, you know, throughout high school, and, you know, the point for me was to just be around books and to be around creativity, because the internet, you know, wasn't, you know, when I was still in high school and all the way back in like 2001, 2002, like it was a very finite place of resources. Like you could really tap out, whereas now you can truly never tap out no matter how much time you spent. So yeah, I still just have a real love of print, and I've always tried to put my work to print whenever I can. So creating books out of my work has always been a passion of mine, and this is just the actual Photoshop file of the book. I can't see myself here, so I'm hoping you can actually see what I'm holding up. But so, and then I get really into packaging the book up, and I have a hard time just like sending a book to the printer, getting it in the mail, and then shipping it out. So I get all these, you know, find just the right bag for this book, and I have a label made. Here's the book. I had these cards made up. So these are all these different, I have a bunch of them here I can show. But they all have these like reflective surfaces that were just kind of these postcards that I wrote notes on the back of when I sent them, kind of like friends and family copies to people. So yeah, so these were all different postcards I had made. I titled this book Crash Report. So you can kind of see here what this book kind of looks and feels like. It's on, you can still, I have a few copies left on my shop, shop.nopattern.com. But I'll run through some of the pages in this book real quick, because this was a really important project to me. It was sort of like, you know, I was really in the thick of working at the agency still, and I really wanted to almost prove to myself that I could complete a project start to finish from absolutely out of nowhere, with no one tasking me with what to do. This page really sort of explains where the inspiration for the title came from. So all that 3D stuff I just shared that was in Photoshop, you know, really, I'm not sure if Photoshop even understands what it's being told to do when you're working the way that I am in these ways in 3D. I think it's still quite primitive. So no matter what, like it was just a constant stream of getting these crash reports and Photoshop quitting, and I would get super frustrated, but eventually it became kind of a charming thing, and I just started to come to sort of expect it. So I started capturing the screenshots of the actual crash reports and the text from the crash reports, because I thought there was something really interesting about actually like committing. You can see it, I'm holding up here, committing. You guys see me, but you see me, right, while I'm doing this? Yeah?
Everything so far, yep.
Cool. Cool. I just want to make sure I'm not holding stuff up and nobody can actually see it. So yeah, so I thought there was something quite funny about putting all these screenshots of error messages into print and making them something very permanent, because there's something we want to go away all the time, but they really kind of took a life of their own on, and it became like Photoshop became like almost like a nemesis at this time. You know, I was not enjoying it. I was super frustrated with the program. I'd just be like in the middle of working on something and it would crash, and I'd be like, shit, you know, like again, like so agitating. And again, I think eventually I just came to sort of accept it and let it be, like just let it be what it was. But yeah, so these are just lots of results of many, many, many experiments. I mean, I have like hundreds and hundreds of these, and there are truly infinite ways that I can output these pieces. Some of them are like insanely busy, and you know, the flow of this is really meant to be sort of soft and sort of more simple. And then this crash happens, and it's like a new, you know, almost taking you along the journey of how I would work and opening up a new file and starting something new. And then it gets so hectic, and then here's actual capture screenshot from one of the crash reports that, you know, came up. And I have like I have so many screenshots of these. And then I would go back in and I would start something completely new yet again. Started dropping in imagery and text and graphics that were not just like flat abstracted things, but were more rooted in an actual visual and an image. You know, dropping in NoPattern. And then, you know, here was actual text that I copied straight out of one of the crash reports. I just became so fascinated with some of the language in these crash reports because there are things that we often just kind of ignore. And again, we just click away really quick, but I started sort of being forced to like see them. And then I would like read what was in there and be like, what, you know, what is Adobe headlights? What is, you know, core foundation? What is, you know, what is like the envelope loop and like all this different stuff. And I found that to be really interesting. I don't know why, but I feel like the language of that really sort of meshed with the aesthetic and the kind of look and feel that I was exploring here with all of this work. So you can kind of see, you know, again, as I go through this, it was just like a lot of exploration. This page has all sorts of terms that came from the crash reports. So like corpse notify, I just love that. It sounds like a hardcore band, like a metal band, like song title or something. Terminating process, metal performance shaders, like all the things on here were straight out of the actual crash reports that were developed from working on these actual pieces. So I would be working on something and then it would give me this crash report. I'd copy the text, put it back into Open Photoshop up and change, you know, whatever I had been working on, like no, it would say NoPattern or something, and I would change it to one of these other terms or things that were, you know, sort of spit out by Photoshop. And yeah, so that's kind of the sort of last, you know, project I did completely, you know, on my own that, you know, was just a really rewarding, fun project for me. And then even more new than that, I started dropping in images of athletes. So late in December, I started working on this series rooted in Michael Jordan. Started putting these, you know, clipped photos of him in. I really wanted to, you know, render out images of you know, an athlete that I grew up loving and watching for my favorite sport, my favorite team. I wanted to show him in a way that people really maybe hadn't seen before. You know, you see him in, you know, black and red and white, but never really in colors like this or rendered in this way. So yeah, so this was a series of prints that I did in a collaboration with a printer in Chicago named Chris. Has a studio called Loop. Fantastic if you're on the market and need printing. I highly recommend him. It was really cool to work with someone who was so attentive to their craft. He's just such a you know, hardcore details guy. So it was really cool to, you know, put this work that's so heavily detailed out and have him, you know, make sure to do it justice with his printing. And then, so I did a timed edition on my shop. So you were able to buy these prints for 10 days, and then I printed as many as were sold in that 10-day time period. It was a really cool way to do it. You know, throughout the years, I've sold prints, a lot of prints on my store, but I'd always done it in like a set quantity. So I would do like, you know, edition of 200 prints, and then, you know, I'd sell 68 of them and then be stuck with like 132 prints left over, you know, and, you know, just try and find ways to like send them out or give them away to people. So kind of a way around that for me, you know, and I don't mean to like, you know, break the fourth wall or make it sound like less, you know, I guess it's just being a very honest tip, I would say, but like doing this timed edition was a really successful approach for me because it really took all risk off and sort of mitigated any financial burden on my end, completely put it onto the, you know, customer. If they wanted the print, then, you know, they pay, and then I would, you know, we would create the print and take that order. And at the end of the 10 days, we looked at all the orders and did them, but it still created a sense of limited, but it was limited to, you know, the number of prints that sold in a time. And I really enjoyed doing that. So I'll definitely be doing more of those and doing that again for sure. And then, yeah, so just to, you know, quickly show you, I know we're going to get to kind of a Q&A portion here, but I'm going to show you guys some of the actual Photoshop stuff. I hope this actually renders and sort of shows up on your end. Please let me know if it's choppy or whatever, but yeah. So I know I can't hear anybody or see anybody's response. Can you just tell me if you can see this moving? Okay.
Yeah, so far we can see it moving.
Oh, okay, all right, right on. So yeah, so essentially this is sourcing an image, you know, that I drop in, and you know, I extrude it out in Photoshop. There's a couple different ways you can extrude your image, and essentially it's still a flat, graphic, but it's pulling from all the points, and the depth is based on the, you know, on the range of color. And so I can kind of turn it and get all the, you know, I just turn on these points. And like, again, for me, like I might not, someone might be listening right now and know 3D a lot better than I do and say he really doesn't know what he's talking about. And the beauty of it for me is that I'm completely okay with that. Honestly, I feel like the second I learn too much is when I'll probably start trying too hard and stop having as much fun with it as I've been having. So, you know, I've been able to kind of go in and sort of teach myself all these different sort of techniques and ways of creating, you know, this work based on, you know, a photo or a graphic or just a bit of color or something. And, you know, open up. So, well, why don't I show this really quick while I'm at it, because everyone always asks about this project, but the Lupe Fiasco Food and Liquor, I know I'm like jumping around here, and I'll stop for a second so we can do questions, but yeah, this was the cover of Lupe Fiasco's Food and Liquor from 2005. I just had it loaded up so that I could share it, because I always get asked about it, even though it's real old at this point. But yeah, this was kind of another sort of like defining like client project in my career. The fact that this is like, you know, 14 years old now and still comes up, and Lupe's still doing his thing and still relevant, but just in different ways and new ways now. But yeah, I mean, this was a pretty rudimentary thing for me. I did all the photography of Lupe at a studio in Chicago, and yeah, cut everything out kind of by hand, and probably even not even that well, to be honest. Like if I really look at this now, there's probably things I would really do different. But again, at the time, there was really no hip hop that looked anything like this. One cool thing that you probably would never know, but this little piece right here is, I'll zoom in so you can see, but I made these little 1-inch buttons back then. So this was the NoPattern logo I used at the time. And he was like, go ahead and throw some NoPattern thing in there. So I dropped in this little graphic from a little, you know, button that I had made. But yeah, I mean, these are basically just like, you know, these light streaks I started doing and getting really known for from projects like this. And it was really basic. I'd always get asked about this, and I was like, there's really nothing special about it. I mean, it's pretty much like a layer set to overlay over these white. I mean, that's, you know, it looks especially bad now when I turn this off, but you know, I would just do these, you know, outer glows on these white streaks, and I would kind of brush in with my tablet and then overlay them with color. And then, yeah, that was really it. Not a whole lot else to that. I've got a bunch of other work opened up here that I can kind of reference and bring up and share some of these like really heavily layered things more if you want to go through them, but I'll go ahead and stop since I've been talking a lot. And yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Chuck. Really appreciate you showing all this work behind the scenes. It's fantastic. What we can do now is we can kind of start going into the Q&A, and we can kind of go from there.
Cool.
Yeah, so one question that has been asked, and this is a question that was asked by Larry, what is next for NoPattern? Which projects are you working on since you recently left MKTG?
Great question. What's up, Larry? Hope you're doing well. I know Larry. I love you, Larry. So the plan right now is that there is no plan. That's the God's honest truth. You know, I don't think that I I don't think many people can reasonably answer about this year that we're in a way that is rooted in plans, because clearly there are no plans that are going to, stick. Everything I had planned or had in mind this year, personally, in my life, my family's life, there's a lot of things that have changed. So because this is sort of, I'm kind of back at this new, my plan right now is to kind of reestablish myself, reestablish my presence, in a way that I feel like is tasteful and thoughtful. Like I said earlier, considering the climate we're in, I feel that as a white male artist designer, that I'm in a position where I want to be very aware of how I use my platform. I want to make sure to continue letting the room kind of breathe and make sure that people who are trying to have their voice heard are more amplified than myself. That doesn't mean that I'm just not going to do anything. It just means I've been kind of thinking a lot about, how I might approach something, or how I might do it in a way that is, again, is sort of honors the moment. So I've been trying to think of ways that I can, be involved again in an authentic way that isn't just like sell something and then just donate the money to the sort of like cause of the moment or whatever. I also have been particularly compelled to be creative lately, given everything that's been going on. So I'm kind of just at the moment sort of waiting and letting ideas come to me. And in the meantime, working on focusing on a couple client projects I have going, kind of reestablishing some relationships with some old clients and with people who I have worked with in the past that I've been reaching out to and having conversations with. I'm trying to be a good listener right now, probably more than any other time in my career, and just kind of, sit with what's going on and try not to force anything, getting my home office, in a good spot. I spent a lot of time like getting this home office to a place that I really like. Probably a lot of time procrastinating and doing other things, doing that when I should be, maybe sitting down and making something. But that's just kind of where my head's been at, is sort of organizing my thoughts and my space, and my spending a lot of time with, a lot more than I could have ever dreamed, spending time with my daughter, which has been probably the biggest silver lining of all this. It's a pretty great blessing to have a 3-year-old right now. They really don't know what's going on, which is which is great. But at the same time, it's hard. You're kind of constantly negotiating your time and your energy and stuff with work and your mental health. And I'm trying to be sure to exercise and take care of myself, but also take care of her, and my wife as well, of course. And so yeah, so that's kind of like where I stand right now, and I'm not really sure what's next, other than I'm going to kind of let some things come to me, and in the meantime, hopefully make some work that has a positive impact when I feel that I'm ready to do that, and I have something worthwhile to say and to contribute.
Well, yeah, thank you so much for sharing. Another really good question that is asked by Eli. Really interested to hear more about how you navigated the business side of design when you were first starting out, such as contracts, pricing, ownership of work, etc.
That's a great question. I get asked that a lot. There's another question, like the last question here I see as well, asks, do you have any advice for negotiating contracts? I'll be honest. Again, when you asked me for a title and I said figuring it out, like I'm not a by the book person at all. I've just really never been. I get that from my dad. I don't. I'm organized in my own way. I don't have like a certain method or a certain. I certainly don't have a rate. I've literally never once in my 16-year career done a hourly rate. I don't think. Maybe once or twice, an hourly rate or a day rate. But for me, that like personally devalues what I do, because especially now I've gotten really fast, and that doesn't mean rushed, but I've gotten very efficient over the years, and I can make work quickly, and I do not like the idea of being punished for that. So I am a purely project-based worker. So I assess a project, and again, like this is, I don't want to say this and have it be looked at as a piece of advice. I'm not advising other people to do this. I've always seen myself first and foremost as an artist more than like a graphic designer. Like I don't do web design. I don't do things where there's like, all right, it's going to take 15 hours because that's how long it just simply takes to do this thing. If I have a good idea in my head and it takes me an hour, I don't really want to be paid by the hour. You know what I'm saying? So, like, but that's a luxury I have now, this far into a career. Early on, it was a lot of asking the client what they had. They'd come to me with a project, and I would say, "What's your budget?" And they might say $1,000, and I'd say, "Well, I'm going to need 1,600," and they would say, "We can do 1,200." And again, I'm like, 18 years old at the time, and that was probably about like the extent of my comfort with negotiating, was like one back and forth and inching it up just a hair. But you do enough of that and you start to become more comfortable with it. And a lot of people never will be comfortable with it. I don't think a lot of artists and designers are particularly comfortable with being their own sort of project manager and negotiator. And so a lot of times I find, especially young, but not just young, a lot of people in general, leaving it up to the client to dictate the budget, and people aren't comfortable pushing back. You have to figure out what's right for you. I can't give a one size fits all answer. I can't give a one size fits all answer about contracts, pricing, ownership of work. I mean, a lot of times, again, like when I do work for a client, like there's going to be language in that, especially if it's, like like when I did the Lupe cover, for example, like the agreement with the record label is that they own the artwork. And I'll get credit for it, but it's theirs. They own it now. And early on, you have to read those. If you have a family friend or like, someone you trust who can deal with contracts, you can always have them look it over. There's a lot more resources online now. But I'm not just saying this to sound entrepreneurial or something. I really did kind of have to figure it out. I had to, like, the only reason I knew how to make a invoice because a good friend of mine, Jeffrey, the guy from Threadless, actually early on when I was starting, he sent me his invoice that he would make in Illustrator, and he just said, swap your information out. When you're done with the project, just email them a PDF of this file and they'll send you your money. And that's how I learned how to do an invoice. So, find a mentor to a degree. I mean, that can be difficult. You don't want to just like ask someone to be a mentor, but like there's so many resources. Like, a lot of people can probably spell this part out better than I can, because my answer is just going to be sort of in the ether and kind of all over the place, because I don't really have like a hard and fast answer, but I understand the frustration and the difficulties of figuring that out. But I do also think it's really important, if you're going to freelance, to do some of it yourself and go through some trial and error and probably get paid less than you were expecting, and then other times maybe get more than you were expecting, and then figure out what your value is. That's kind of what I've had to do. So yeah, that's all I can really say, because that's been my experience. So
Sure. Yeah, we can shift over to education, because I think your trajectory is very interesting, and I think a lot of our audience here is very intrigued with how you decided, not to pursue a traditional academic, trajectory of going to school and getting a degree. And myself, I'm an educator, so I'm all about self, educated and but also at the same time getting yourself around other people. Uh, Here's a really good question from Chris. As a student who will not be continuing with design school in the fall, how did you stay motivated when you were 19 and 20 years old?
yeah. Man. Well, when I was, I mean, truth is, like, when I was 19, it was 2004. And if you're 19 in 2020, like, your life, your upbringing is, I mean, it's what was wildly different than mine. I was introduced to the internet when I was like 12, and it was very, a very different thing then. And so, I imagine if you're 19 or 20 now, that you've essentially completely grown up with it in your life, you're used to it. You know, so I'm first and foremost kind of aware of that. I think the way that I stayed motivated back then had a lot to do with my ability to stand out on the internet, because I didn't have a lot of the way I always frame it is this: like when I was starting out, there was a huge pro and a huge con. And the huge pro was the fact that if you could find a way to get your name out there and find a way to get in touch with potential clients, find a way to successfully self-promote, you would, it was very easy to stand out. If your work was decent and you were good at self-promoting, you didn't have a whole lot of competition on the internet. Like early on, you just didn't. There just weren't a lot of, you know, other people vying for attention that way, because the internet wasn't really set up for that. There were not competing. Like a lot of people might not even have portfolios, they just have an Instagram. Like I don't know what that's like. I had to literally, like, my website was everything. Like that is the only place I could direct potential clients to, and there was no social media or anything at all. So the pro was that if you could figure out how to stand out, you could really stand out. The big con was that it was really difficult to find ways to do that. It was really hard to find people's email addresses. It was really hard to figure out, you know, it was all done very manually. Like I said, like sitting with magazines and books, looking for people's names very much sort of by hand. Now I think the opposite is true. Now it's easier than ever to get the attention of people, and harder than ever to stand out, because literally everyone of all ages has all the same tools at their disposal. So I think at the time, motivation for me came in the form of sort of this constant cycle of getting attention in a far smaller, sort of fishbowl, if you will. Whereas now it's so big and there's a million people. I think that I was kind of getting a constant cycle of very direct feedback and attention. And that was when I was 19. That was something that really motivated me, because I was able to kind of get that. And I think now that's maybe been replaced by an orange bubble on Instagram, you know, and getting likes, and you feel like, oh, a lot of people like that, I'll do more of that. I know that feeling well too. Staying motivated, you know, it's one of two things. You know, it's either hard work and you're having a hard time like getting motivated, so you're trying to get motivated and get inspired, and you're trying really hard to look at, you know, books or magazines or blogs or Instagrams or, you know, whatever it may be, and trying to fill yourself with images and information to hopefully spark something. And the other kind of motivation is when you're just genuinely, purely excited about an idea that you have, and you're just looking around more casually for things to kind of supplement that, you know, motivation. So I think, you know, it does take a lot of work, and you do have to work at it to stay motivated if you're not going to continue school. I mean, I know I'm kind of like rambling here, but I just feel like there's so much context for me at the age I'm at and when I started my career to answer a question like this for someone who's 15 years younger than me, because it's just, I can't just sort of like apply my experience to you. But I will say, like, more than, you know, more than I have in a very long time right now, in the kind of like, you know, the time we're in with COVID and, you know, just what we're living through, it's important to, you know, safely get out, you know, exercise, look around you, like, you know, try and take care of yourself, and, you know, use that time to think of ideas. You know, that's what I do. Like when I run, or if I'm just walking my dog, like, or listening to a podcast, I'm always trying to think of like, what's a project I want to do? What do I want to pour myself into? You know, you need, you know, motivation for something. What's the, you know, so all, remember too, that's important to have a goal in order to like get motivated, you know, for, you know, the purpose of that goal, as opposed to just sort of be vaguely motivated in the abstract, for what to, looking at eye candy and cool designs all day for, you know, no reason. So a big part of it too is, you know, my family. Like I feel very I'm motivated now because I have a real, you know, different purpose having a kid. When I was 19 or 20, it was purely like a survival mode, like trying to make a name for myself. So at the end of the day, I mean, it might sound like trite and corny, but I do think that ultimately everything I'm saying rolls into the fact that you need a purpose, you know, in order to be motivated, you know, by, whether that's money and you just need to make a living, whether it's, you know, you're trying to, you know, complete a project or an idea that you have, or whatever the case may be, figuring out a purpose ultimately is kind of what, I think sort of gives way to, having a reason to stay motivated in the first place. So yeah, I think I covered like about everything I could in that with that, even how I stay inspired now. I think all of that is important. And again, like I might have a more succinct, elegant answer in other times, but yeah, it's a weird time. So.
That's a very good answer. And I think a lot of students now can relate to that. When you go on Instagram, it is a sea of the same thing over and over again. So I can totally understand what you're saying there. Here's a really good question that is asked by Tyler. What is your most favorite medium to communicate with?
I mean, it's hard for me not to say. I mean, like everything I've shown ultimately has roots in photography. Um, I consider myself a pretty good photographer. That's kind of like I feel like I'm like a good photographer. I wouldn't say I'm an amazing photographer. I wouldn't say I'm like a I feel like what I am ultimately best at is taking a photo and breaking it down and then repurposing it. I mean, almost everything I've showed you is collage too. So like I really love putting things together from different mediums. So taking like this piece you're seeing right now, this Jordan piece that I did for the Bulls when the Last Dance was airing, is meant to tell the story of that last game against Utah in at the end of their last championship, and really to sort of they gave me a synopsis of the episode ahead of time, and so I knew what I needed to communicate. There's a lot of story to tell from that episode. So my challenge was, do I keep it really simple? I can walk through a couple of these other pieces. Like this piece, I kept really super simple. I felt like the focus should be Jordan against Miller, and Kerr hitting that shot, and then Malone and Stockton back there, and just kind of like very sort of simple focal points. This piece even more simple and being more typographic, and rooted in sort of Jordan coming back. He was 23, and then he came back as 45 for a short time, and then back to 23. And so for me, like telling the story, this one about Jordan playing baseball and his dad dying, so like as I walk through all these pieces, like the styles are all slightly different, but I'm trying to communicate through collage essentially, and through showing a singular image made up of many other images. And I would say that's probably one of the most common themes in my work. So I think probably I guess that's I mean, but again, like the name NoPattern is not an accident. Like when I came up with that, it had a lot to do with the fact that I can never quite make my mind up, and my tastes change seemingly from day to day. Like this Bulls hat really, isn't really collage. It's sort of taking something and manipulating it to be something new. So maybe that's like the better answer. I don't know what the right medium is, but whatever medium requires me to show something in a new light, through sort of manipulating and changing it, is what I feel satisfied with, and what I would say is like my favorite, I suppose.
All right, and I'm going to ask one more question to kind of wrap this session up. And the question is from James. His question is, we see a source image from one of the extruded 3D images of Jordan. How do you get the spectrum colors to interact with a 3D as well?
Sure. So I haven't really spilled the tea on this, type of work yet at all, ever. There's a bit of like mystery to it I like to kind of maintain, but for the kids, I'll show you. Let me open one up here. Jeez, I opened a lot of stuff. Let's do the Rodman piece. So, or let's do Iverson. How about that? So, give me a second while I make this a little more easy to see. All right. So, so we're in Photoshop. You can see the, vague kind of impression of Iverson dribbling the ball. I'll kind of rotate it so you can kind of see even more. There's some perspective on the camera right now that's pretty intense, like in a wide angle. So it does it'll never line up perfectly at the moment. But there you can kind of see, the front, the back. And then, over here with all my points, I can turn these points off. And these colors, this is just a pretty basic. I mean, if anybody is in the chat and wants to explain this, by all means, because I truly don't know. But this essentially color that you're getting is just called normals, which I believe to be a way that 3D is kind of showing the depth based on different valuations of dark to light. So kind of the baseline, that purple, and then everything else is either deeper or sort of more shallow or further up based on its color. I'll show you the source image that this is actually pulling from. It's literally just a photo of him. So that's so I get a photo, I do a really rough cutout because I really don't need it to be perfect. I mean, this looks like shit, like you can see how bad that looks, but I really want it to be as fast as possible because at the end of the day, you're not really seeing what this is. So yeah, so this is kind of one component of this whole project that I really wanted to find a cool way to put online, and I'll be doing more of this type of work for sure because I'm still so intrigued by it. I love the fact that I can take this right here, but then zoom all the way and then forget that this is even an image of a basketball player. You know what I mean? And I can kind of go really far here and adjust the points values and these different lines. And again, just for anybody wondering, I literally just one day clicked around a little too much in Photoshop, and I was like, whoa, that looks kind of wild. And I just kind of kept going and kind of teaching myself until I got really familiar with what I was doing. And again, a lot of it is very much out of my hands, but a lot of the results are really out of my hands, but that's kind of what I love about it. Like I said earlier, I feel like if I learn too much now, I'll be too spoiled, or I'll try too hard to, make work that looks a certain way. And I love that this looks like nothing else out there. It feels very me. It feels very on brand with what I do as NoPattern, but still feels like an evolution of my work, and feels, at the end of the day, most importantly, I think feels very rewarding and fun to work on. I really love, working on this stuff. And here's another example really quick. You can kind of see this is Dennis Rodman. If you kind of look, you'll see the ball on the top right. I'll rotate this so you can kind of see the, there we go. So you can kind of see his jersey and his legs there and his face. But yeah, it's just all these incredible points. And again, to me, it's nothing particularly special about this functionality in Photoshop so much as how I've decided how to use it. It's kind of like anything, right? I mean, it's it's really about how you, what you make of this, and kind of how I honed it. Like I said earlier with the crash report stuff, I can turn that surface on like I did before and turn these points off if you want to see what that looks like. So yeah, so that's kind of a little behind the scenes look, and that's officially the most I've ever given away or shown how this stuff is really made. But I mean, I think it's pretty I find it pretty interesting still. So yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all of your insights and your journey and advice. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And thank you so much for those who joined us today. There is an after lunch session, so you should have received an invitation in your email. Chuck, thank you so much for everything, for your time, and until next time.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. I wish you all the best doing this. I'm glad you're doing it. And thanks for everybody who hopped on. And yeah.
Take care, everyone. Thank you, Chuck.
Thanks.